Because it won't cost the government anything at that point. You simply write legislation that says how you have to conduct your loans, and you then enforce that legislation. And people who don't abide by that legislation, you impose a fine on them, and the government has another source of income without paying for loans.
So why do we think what's stopping them from doing this restructuring? It seems pretty simple, pretty bad. And I don't know, like I said, we could make another episode, but it's the first time in my life since I've been able to vote, this will be my 5th year, because I'm 23, I guess 24 by then, or 5. But yeah, it's really a struggle. It's like difficult. And I understand that voting is important and that you should always vote. But on the other hand, it's like, I feel responsible for who I vote for.
And that's the thing. Most voters go out there. So there's a large chunk of voter that votes along party lines because their parents did, and they'll never change. And they're kind of locked in. There's a certain percentage of those. Then there's the kind of people who are easily swayed, the kind of people who hear one argument, don't do any research, and go do their thing. They're the uninformed voter. Then there's the informed voter. They're probably the smallest percentage out there. They're the ones the politicians are terrified of. Because if you're smart enough to go out and do your own research from multiple sources and draw your own conclusions, you terrify politicians. They want mindless lemmings out there that they can tell you who to vote for, and you'll just go do it. And if you vote along party lines, you're the ideal candidate. They don't have to say anything. They could go out there and kill people in the streets, and you'll still vote for them.
Yep.
That's what they hope for. And if you're informed, and the one thing that we try to do on all of our podcasts is to educate and inform people, enlighten people. Don't listen to what I'm telling you. Don't listen to what we say on the show. Go do your own research.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm willing to have my point of view changed if it's legitimate. But don't just vote. The politicians go out there, you have to vote. It's important. Go vote.
They guilt you. No.
Right. But, as a citizen, it's your job that's the one duty that you have is to vote. But what they're really saying is vote for me.
Right.
And voting is important because it's the only way that our kind of government continues to exist. So I totally advocate people vote. But when you're voting, if you're voting in your local election or your school board or something like that, understand the choice that you make affects you. You may not think who's in Congress affects you, but I'll guarantee you it does, because the amount of money you pay in taxes and the amount of money they take out of your pocket is something you can control by who you vote for. And if you vote somebody in this time and they don't do what you want, or you don't think that by the end of their term you're better off, or if you are worse off, vote the next guy in. And then vote the next guy in. Keep doing that until you teach them that you're in charge. The first thing the politician wants to do when they get into office is get reelected. That's their number one priority. It's not you. It's not their constituents. It's not the people that contributed to them. It's to get reelected. And they're never going to vote term limits on themselves. The highest office in the land has term limits. Politicians, Congress, Senate, they'll never do that. We have the power to do that. If you don't let incumbents get reelected, you're imposing term limits. And even if the guy gets in and you like him, vote him out. And vote the next guy out. And vote the next guy out. Don't let him get entrenched. Don't let him get in there. Don't let him create a power base or start to influence things or anything. That you've got people now, and I'm going off topic obviously here, but it's important to discuss. You had Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell gets up there the other day and does a presser, and something in his brain hits pause right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean or facetious or anything. It was very clear the man had some kind of health issue at that moment. But they walked him off the stage and brought him back a little bit later after they did whatever they had to do to fix the wiring there so he could finish what he was saying, so he could pretend like he was still okay. And that was just so they could keep power. That's what they're doing. They did the same thing the same day Dianne Feinstein.
Was that where they told her to just say aye?
Just say aye.
Yeah.
Because she was completely oblivious as to what was going on because she was so far gone.
We see it with Biden all the time, too.
Yeah. And, this isn't a crack on old people or mental illness or anything like that. But there comes a point when you're no longer effective at your job.
Right.
And when you get to that point, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And when I hurt my back, I couldn't do that anymore. So I knew I had to change careers. I had to go do something else that was not impactful to that. And I did. Had I kept doing it, I wouldn't be able to do my job and I'd get fired. You can't allow people to stay in power who can't do the job.
And unloading tractor trailers is much lower stakes than running the country.
That's true. That is true.
And that's the part that scares me is like you have these people that may not, and it's okay. When people get to a certain age, you might not be all there.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't also still have the same amount of power as you did when you were fully lucid.
Right. They talk about Reagan when he was in office, where he started having onsets of Alzheimer's. And do you really want someone who's suffering from a disease like that to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Yep.
Like, you have to do what is right. You have to have some moral sense of right and wrong to put your foot down in these times, or at least have the gumption and the class to step away and say, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm not up to it anymore. I can't do it the way that it needs to be done. Let a younger person come in and do this type stuff. We as the voter have the power to do that.
The more you know.
Anyway, that's it for my soapbox for there. We're going to run over time here, but that's okay. We're going to come back with our last segment here and talk about religion, free speech, and gay rights. That should be a quick one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are still covering the Supreme Court's recent decisions after a brief aside.
Sidebar into politics.
Yeah, but we're back, and this is our last point for today. Religion, free speech, and gay rights. That's a lot, but we're going to do our best. The 6-3 decision, which turned on the court's interpretation of the First Amendment, appeared to suggest that the rights of LGBTQ people are on more vulnerable legal footing, particularly when they're at odds with claims of religious freedom. The ruling was the court's latest in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. The Supreme Court sided on Friday with a web designer, recently. The Supreme Court sided recently with a web designer in Colorado who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design wedding websites for same-sex couples despite a state law that forbids discrimination against gay people.
Justice Neil Gorsuch. Is that Gorsuch?
I have no idea.
I'm not very good
Neil.
with names. Neil. Justice Neil.
I'm sure he loves to be called that.
Writing for the majority in a 6-3 vote, said the First Amendment protected the designer, Lorie Smith, from being compelled to express views she opposed. Quote, 100 years ago, Miss Smith might have furnished her services using pen and paper. Those services are no less protected speech today because they're conveyed with a voice that resonates further than it could from any soapbox.
Yeah, I was reading the show notes before the show. What? I don't understand what that means. Like, what is he saying?
Basically, he's saying that because it's something that's being done on the internet and has a wider reach, it's no different than if it was a printed material.
Okay, gotcha.
The case, though framed as a clash between free speech and gay rights, was the latest in a series of decisions in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. At the same time, the ruling limited the ability of governments to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The justices split surprisingly along ideological lines, and the two sides appeared to talk past each other, kind of like politicians tend to do. The majority saw the decision as a victory that safeguarded the First Amendment right of artists to express themselves. The liberal justices viewed it as something else entirely, a dispute that threatened societal protections for gay rights and rolled back some recent progress. This also comes at a time when transgender people are facing increased discrimination at the local and national level, with the American Civil Liberties Union stating that there are currently 492 bills in the works around the country that would directly harm transgender individuals.
And this goes back to what we're talking about with this backsliding that we're feeling, right? This is another example of that. Using the Constitution as the weapon. In an impassioned dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the outcome signaled a return to a time when people of color and other minority groups faced open discrimination. It was the second time this week that the justice summarized her dissent from the bench, a rare move that signals deep disagreement. Appearing dismayed, Justice Sotomayor spoke for more than 20 minutes. Quote, "This case cannot be understood outside of the context in which it arises. In that context, the outcome is even more distressing. The LGBT rights movement has made historic strides, and I am proud of the role this court recently played in that history. Today, however, we are taking steps backwards." A Colorado law forbids discrimination against gay people by businesses open to the public, as well as statements announcing such discrimination. Ms. Smith, the woman who owned the website, who has said that her Christian faith requires her to turn away same-sex couples seeking website design services. I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. Jesus probably has a Squarespace page. Seeking website design services has not yet begun her wedding business, nor has she posted a proposed statement on her current website about her policy and beliefs for fear, she has said, of running afoul of the law. So she sued to challenge it, saying it violated her rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion.
So, you jumped on my point too quickly there. So, okay, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, nothing like that. There are no teachings.
There's not? I thought there was.
Nothing.
I'm not even joking. I legitimately thought there was about like
not
men.
a single mention.
Oh.
There are stories about same-sex. There are instances of it occurring in there. Nothing is ever preached against. In fact, if you go by the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says to love all men, to love all people. So there's nothing in there. How the court could even use that as an excuse, number one. Number two, I'll guarantee you there's nothing about websites in the Bible, okay? Maybe the new King Charles Bible there might be, but there's nothing in the King James Bible or before it that has anything to do with it. So that's a falsehood.
And that makes sense why Justice Neal had that quote that he had, because you have to frame it so it's legitimate.
Right.
And not a bunch of baloney.
So, and the other problem that I have here is she's not being forced to express opinions that are contrary to her beliefs. She's being contracted to produce a website for someone else. If she didn't like fur coats and she made a website for someone selling fur coats, nobody would confuse her as being the person selling fur coats. Mm-hmm. So using that as logic for why you can't produce something for someone else is bogus. So there isn't a single argument in this case that has a leg to stand on.
But it worked.
But somehow the conservative Supreme Court decided to latch onto this with as flimsy an argument as it was to set precedent again.
And to legalize discrimination.
And that's exactly what it is. That is how dangerous this Supreme Court is, and that is how broken this Supreme Court is that they took something that was so flimsy, it shouldn't have gotten past.
It's like a Judge Judy case.
Right. It shouldn't have gotten past TV court. Yeah. Okay. It was literally that weak of an argument. And somehow the Supreme Court decided that was important enough to listen to.
And to create such like strong precedent,
Right.
which makes you wonder that they could do it with anything, right? Like,
The Supreme Court receives hundreds and hundreds of cases a year to hear. And they go through and they cherry pick the ones that they feel are the most important, the most impactful, and the ones that are the most influential on the Constitution. And they pick this steaming pile of crap as one of the ones that they wanted to talk about.
it's pretty tough to not argue there's an agenda when this is what they go with.
Exactly. That's why it was vitally important that we talk about this one.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed at our Supreme Court for even listening to arguments on this case. It's that bad.
Right. And it's like, if you actually look at the case, it is just gay people trying to exist. And when you look at a lot of these anti-LGBT laws or anti-trans laws, it is just people trying to live and maybe get married. And it's like, it's always framed as if they have this like agenda, like they want to take over the country, the LGBT people.
Indoctrination.
Yeah.
You got to throw that in there,
It's
too.
a bunch of baloney, man. Like it's these people are just trying to live and be treated fair and equally, but that's just not allowed.
No, and the worst part is the state itself had already passed legislation that prevented this.
Right. So move.
Now, the problem that I have, I have several problems with this. The other problem that I have here is this Constitution says any laws that the Constitution does not explicitly cover fall to states' rights.
Yep.
There's no anti-discrimination law in the Constitution. So therefore, if the state has a law that governs it, the state should take precedent. The Supreme Court should have had no jurisdiction over this case whatsoever because of that law that was on the books.
Yeah. Should have been done right down there.
So it should have never even gotten to the Supreme Court.
But when you can politicize anything and you can make an agenda out of it, because now it becomes an issue of the First Amendment, which isn't that the one about free speech? First Amendment?
Free speech and freedom of religion.
Yeah. So, but like it's...
So how does her freedom of religion trump the other people's free speech by having a website?
Right.
Someone needs to explain that one too.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty tough. No matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, it's pretty tough to argue that there is not an agenda here. Especially this. It's good we ended with this because this is like the standout.
It's the smoking gun.
Yeah.
You know, not only is it an agenda, it's a poorly thought out, poorly researched, and poorly executed agenda.
And a hateful one.
Yeah, and it's blatant. Like it's like the expectation that Americans are stupid is written into this agenda because you're not supposed to see this stuff. You're not supposed to pay attention to it. Supreme Court rule. They're supreme, so it should be okay, right? Only we're overturning other Supreme Courts, so it's really not supreme. It's kind of the okay court now.
Yeah.
Just do as we say, though. That's the hypocrisy that our country is dealing with today.
Yeah, and it goes back to that. You know, we talked about the feeling of regression and the feeling of legalized discrimination. And again, we mentioned this a lot. But if you're an audio listener, we're two white guys, so
Right.
you know, it's really not impacting us that much. I can't imagine what it must be like being a transgender person or a member of the LGBT community or a minority or a woman. Like there's just so many people out there that are, and I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because it is so horrible, right? I'm not laughing to make light of it.
Right.
I'm laughing because it is just, it's really bad.
And that's like, it's literally so bad that you don't need to be a member of the community to see how blatant
Yeah.
this is and how wrong it is. That's how bad it is at this point.
And it's not even hidden. And then they have the Republican side of this. They tend to like put the blame on the other side of like, oh well, they're the ones that are trying to take all the power. They're the ones that are actually trying to brainwash you. When in reality, that's just not true.
Right.
It could be in some way, but not nearly as much as the right is doing.
Right.
I just don't know how you can see that and just act like, you know, if you believe in these far right conservative Christian ideas that, like, you know, that you're the minority in this, like
So I'm going to get insulting here for a second because I just can't make my point without being insulting. So the people that are doing this, the far right politicians and radicals that are doing this are so blatant and so callous and not well thought out that their argument requires stupidity to believe are doing that because the vast majority of people that support right-wing politics are stupid. They're people who don't want to think for themselves, don't want to do their own research, blindly want to follow somebody who they think is the next coming of Jesus, and generally are religious fanatics.
But they think that they are smart because they have backing like this where they're being legitimized.
They think they're smart because the people that know they're stupid keep telling them they're smart.
Yep.
Okay.
And that they have all the answers. You have to I hear this a lot with what I do for a living, okay? They say, "Oh, you can't trust the Democrats, you can't trust the liberals. They're trying to brainwash you. But you can trust me. I have all the answers." And I'm like, you are no different than if they actually are brainwashing you on the left, because you're doing the exact same thing. You're delegitimizing everything else, but you're saying you have to listen to me. I have all the answers. You can trust me.
Right. They can't provide proof or evidence or a logical argument, so their way of arguing their point is to attack the legitimacy of the other guy.
And it's working.
It's fake news. Don't listen to it. It's political sabotage. It's a witch hunt. It's never me.
Right.
You've got a former president of the United States with like 50 indictments against him right now.
And he said he's going to run from jail.
And it's not him. It's everybody else.
And it works.
But it doesn't take a genius. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to look at this and say, you're delusional.
Yeah.
Like it can't be that.
Yeah.
But the problem is their supporters don't see logic.
And though it's like when, we talked about earlier when we got on our little aside about voting, right? The types of voters, the people that will vote on party lines. And now you have that with this far right, that they're going to vote. Like, when Trump said he could shoot somebody and get away with it, he was right.
Right.
Like,
exactly. He literally got up on national television and bragged about inappropriately groping a woman.
And then got elected.
And got elected president. They'll vote for him no matter what.
And then they'll do it out of spite.
He gets indicted for violating espionage laws. And he gets $1 million in donations the next day. He gets indicted. Did he get indicted yet for the other one?
I have no idea. We can do another episode on that.
There's so many indictments. It's hard to keep score at this point.
Yeah.
But every time he does something wrong, he gets more supporters.
And if he does go to prison for something, I think it will guarantee that he gets elected. Like it's like the kingpin.
Well, fortunately, there's 2 indictments he's under that if he gets elected, if he gets convicted, he cannot hold public office.
Oh.
Well,
then the Supreme Court will just say that,
then the Supreme Court will reinterpret the Constitution,
Exactly.
I'm sure. So anyway, that's where we're at.
That's the show.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, we don't even have to summarize. It's literally that bad at this point. Before we do go, though, I want to take a moment to push the right button here, which I just did, and invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already do so. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio versions of all of our network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Pandora, Castro, Podbean, Buzzsprout, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days, but not Stitcher soon. So Stitcher's going away.
Rest in peace, Stitcher.
I would also invite you to contact us. Tell us how we're doing. Argue with us. Tell us we're wrong, that we don't know what we're talking about. I'm take anything at this point in time.
The liberal check is in the mail.
You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter at insights_things. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings 5 days a week. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime. Throw that our way. We'd appreciate that. Or you can get links to all these and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 20. Don't touch that dial. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host today, Sam Whalen. How you doing today, Sam?
Good. How you doing?
Fantastic. So this topic kind of came up when I was doing some research on various things that we could talk about. This one kind of hit home, mainly because of what you do. What is it that you do that's tied to this topic?
So I currently am a producer at an AM radio station. I run the board for a bunch of different shows 3 days a week. I also would like to break into the FM market at some point. That's sort of my goal. Went to college for it, did radio in college, did radio in high school. Radio is my passion, and it's what I want to do for a living. This topic was important and something I think about too often.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the resume there. We'll make sure we get
no
that
problem.
out to
Yeah,
everyone.
check out my website.
So the article that I came across happened to deal with current automakers like BMW, Tesla, Audi, Porsche, and Volvo, all taking steps to remove AM radios from their electric vehicles. And it made me think, and it's making a lot of people think, what's the fate of this aging but reliable form of communication? And that's what we're going to discuss today. But before we do that, I did want to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days, Apple, Spotify, Google, and so forth. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or you can find links to all of our social media on our main website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. So there's one particular article that I read was on a site, northjersey.com. And they kind of talk about the fact that it's no secret that AM radio has kind of lost much of its luster over the decades. And it was introduced in the early 1900s. And it's lost out to superior technologies, FM being the first one that threatened it. Satellite radio, and now we're talking, podcasts and streaming and YouTube and everything you can get over the internet now. In fact, that's one of the things that these car companies are saying is that everything that you could get over AM, you can get over streaming now in the car, which I guess is a valid point as long as that infrastructure is working, right? AM has been traditionally relegated mostly to talk shows at this point in time. And again, that's because of the limitations in the technology. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with AM and what the limitations of that technology are and why people might be wanting to move away from it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you listen to any AM broadcast, you're going to hear it immediately, the difference between AM and FM. The sound quality is just much lower, and that has to do a lot with how it transmits its signal. It limits itself, essentially. But because it's so simple, it's effective in more rural areas and areas where you might not have the high-speed internet you would need for streaming services. But again, because of those limitations, like you said, we are mostly talk because, anything more complicated, you just wouldn't hear it because it's, as it's broadcasted, it's all garbled and talk is the only thing that really can come through effectively. But yeah, it's kind of a miracle that AM is still around. I think, even as someone that works at an AM station, it is definitely, it feels like a relic. And when you bring it up to anybody, you immediately are, they're like, you know, it's dated and it feels dated. But you know, there is still a market for it in areas where it's not as populated, where it's easy to get an AM signal. We do have people that call in still. We do have listeners, even with those limitations. So,
well, and that's the technology itself doesn't lend itself to high fidelity broadcast, stereo, or all the new fangled high grade music and stuff that we do now. But what it is, it's reliable and it transmits very far. It doesn't, because of the frequencies that it operates on, it's not as susceptible to interference with, you know, objects, you know, Wi-Fi, for instance. You run Wi-Fi in your house, and if you have drywall in your house, that can interfere with your Wi-Fi signals because of the higher frequencies.
And weather too.
Yes, that's one thing. But I will say that from a weather standpoint, it's interesting listening to AM radio in a thunderstorm, because every time there's a bolt of lightning, you can hear it over the radio.
Yep.
But it's exactly that reliability that resulted in it becoming really America's backbone for our national public warning system, which is one of the paramount reasons that people are trying to preserve it now, not just, you know, for talk radio and such, but a large chunk of our emergency broadcast system is done over AM radio. In fact, our government is still trying to preserve this. U.S. Congressman Josh Geitheimer thinks we can't lose AM radio. He says AM radio is resilient to cyber attacks, nuclear threat, and natural disasters. He goes on to say that when cell phones go out, the internet gets cut off, or television doesn't work because there's no power in your house, you can still use an AM radio. It'll still be there.
Yep.
And that's true. I mean, people have hand crank AM radios for emergency weather services and natural disasters and things like that. How significant do you think it would be if AM went away and we lost those forms of communication? Would it be a public health hazard?
I think it definitely could be, because I mean, you know, when all else fails, you would still be able to turn to that. You know, everybody, even if they've never tuned to AM on their car or radio before, you can, and you would still be able to get that information. If that goes away, there really is no no like last resort that you'd be able to go to get that information. You could, you know, we get government warnings on our phones, but if there's some kind of electrical malfunction, your phone is dead, and there's no cell service, no internet service, you're not going to get those alerts. TV broadcasts, you know, you see emergency alert system tests on TV all the time, but again, if power goes out or if the, you know, TV networks go out, you're going to lose that service. AM radio, it's pretty hard to shut it down unless you like destroy the transmitting towers, because no matter what, it's going to go out. And like you said, you can get a hand cranked radio to always get that signal. So I think it would be, you know, it seems like a really low chance that we'd have to use it for something. But if we did and we didn't have it, the consequences would be pretty rough.
Well, and, you know, I'll take us back to when 9/11 happened. You know, I was working up in central New Jersey, so most of the radio and TV stations that we had pulled from New York. And when the first tower went down, it took one of the major transmitting stations for all the television networks down.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and because it was mounted on top of the tower, because it was the largest structure in the city. And we lost all of the antenna service that we had at the time. We didn't have cable; we had antenna service, and obviously, it's a time that everyone's kind of scared, not knowing what's going on. So you're looking to get news. Well, all the internet sites were hammered at the time. You couldn't get anything. In fact, the only internet news we could get, we had to go to European sites to get that, and they had, you know, spotty reporting at best. We had someone who had an old 9-volt radio in their desk that they would listen to on their break. And they pulled that out, they pulled up an AM news station, and that was how we kept in touch during 9/11. So it's not that unreasonable to think that it's that important. And it's, you know, the whole reason this topic came up was because of the auto industry kind of pushing the issue itself. But that's not really the driving force behind this, but it's the reasoning behind the auto industry's move away from AM is sketchy, I would say at best. What are the reasonings that they have for moving away from AM?
So I'm looking at the show notes. I'm just trying to make sure we covered the right parts. We already covered the issues, but yeah, the real issue is deeper than car makers trying to modernize their products. This is from Forbes magazine. 40% of all radio listening is done in cars, which is great for us and the radio side of things because you're guaranteed an audience. A lot of, like when you do ratings and stuff, you can't guarantee an audience, but radio, you can kind of cheese the numbers because everyone's got a radio in their car. Even if they're not really listening, it's on. So that counts when it comes to ratings.
Sure, yeah.
If the auto industry turns away from AM, losing that large percentage of listeners could doom the platform and make it impossible to stay commercially viable, which is also very true because in radio, it all comes down to your ratings so that you can sell advertising to then go back into the station to fund more things. It's a cycle. And ratings are everything. If you don't have those ratings and you don't have that market, you've pretty much got no reason to be operational because it is all commercial based, even if it is being used for government services. Bipartisan groups of elected leaders have sponsored the AM for Every Vehicle Act, which I imagine is, a bill to force AM in every car, no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that would be a good thing, because even if you never use it, like you said, when it comes to 9/11, having it in a time like that would be extremely useful and helpful. And if there was no option for that, I don't know what you would do. I think it would make panic even worse than it probably already would be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's almost like a safety blanket at this point in time. People know that if they need to get that information, they can, even though they might not avail themselves of it on a regular basis. There's thousands and thousands of weather radios out there that people have just when there's a storm, and those weather radios get their information over an AM band. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that the auto industry is claiming is that because of the electrical emissions from electrical vehicles, it causes interference over AM radios, and they don't want a negative experience for their users
that are listening to AM radio. Like that Venn diagram is pretty small.
That's a very good point. Is that the fact that they've got people that are listening to AM radios are clearly not looking for a high fidelity signal to begin with.
Yeah, I don't think, like I said, the Venn diagram of electric car users and AM radio listeners are that in between is, I would argue, probably non-existent.
and I would tend to agree with that as well. So, and that's why I say I think their motivation for it's to save money, but I can't imagine that putting an AM capable radio in an electric vehicle is the cost center.
Well, it's also probably because they want to have a deal with satellite radio companies, because most times when you buy a car now, it's got Sirius built into it, Sirius XM.
Well, yeah, but my vehicle has Sirius built into it. They didn't have to not have AM on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't do it. Maybe if it's I don't think it's an electrical interference problem. I just don't buy that.
I don't either, and that's almost like one of those things where they don't want you to use your cell phone on an airplane because it interferes with telemetry. And it's like, yes, if under certain circumstances there's a 1 in a million chance that it interferes with it, you probably don't want that chance happening on a plane. I can't imagine there being anything detrimental about an AM radio that's just receiving, not transmitting, on an electric vehicle.
Yeah, and like I have a AM radio transmitter hooked up to my stereo, or a receiver hooked up to my stereo, and it's just like a square piece of plastic with wire wrapped around it. That's all you need to get AM signal. It's not like you need a full stereo or radio head to get it.
Right.
You just need some wire that you stick out.
And it's funny you mention that, because during that 9/11 situation, the radio that we had was not getting a very good signal. So we actually took a piece of coax, stripped all the shielding off of it, and just turned that into a bigger antenna and got a clearer signal.
Yeah, and like that's one of the reasons I love radio so much. Not just AM. I don't really love AM that much, but FM, radio in general, the concept of radio. It's so accessible, and I've always equated it to like sticking your hand in a river. Like the radio is always there, and there's so many ways to access it. And you could have a big boombox that you tune your favorite station to, but you can also have something in the palm of your hand that can do the same thing. And I just think like you don't really get that with any other medium. Not to mention it's very like personable. Like when you're listening to a DJ, it feels like it's just you and them having a conversation, and you don't get that with TV or movies.
Sure.
And I think AM does have that, and that's another reason why talk is so successful on AM when it is because you can access it in a variety of ways that are pretty easy, and you don't have to pay to listen to the radio. Like you don't have to pay a subscription fee. You can just have a wire and stick it up in the air and have some sort of output, and you're listening. There's no barrier to entry, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. And it's so accessible, no matter where you are in life. I just think it's great.
Well, and it's funny because there's been a push by politicians to declare internet as a public utility. Everyone needs to have internet. And I don't want to argue with that. I mean, that's our medium of choice for the podcast. And I think everyone should have it. But if everyone should have the internet as a public service, everyone should have AM. AM already exists. Why would you take it away?
And it's much easier to give everybody access to AM than it is internet.
Absolutely.
Because the less populated areas you get, it's way harder to get that internet working. I have a friend of mine who lives in Maine, and his two choices for internet were Spectrum or like satellite internet, which is way worse.
Right.
And the delay in that is insane. And this is in 2023, and he's not even in like a rural area. He's just in Maine. There's still parts of the country where you're not getting 5G, upload speeds and things like that. And, that's going to be a problem for many more years to come. They're not going to have that ironed out. Certainly not in a way that it works as reliably as AM does now.
Well, and that's sort of what the auto industry is kind of counting on, is people getting this information over the internet. And the problem with the model of the internet is it's cost-centric to the consumer, where if you want the internet, you have to pay for it in some form, either through taxes, through direct subscriptions, or whatever, whereas AM is producer-centric. So if someone wants to produce content and put it out on radio, they have to fund it. They fund it through through listenership and through advertising, but there's no cost, like you said, to the consumer at that point in time. So it makes it accessible to low-income people, to seniors, to everybody out there who doesn't have unlimited income and free disposable income.
And going back to that accessibility thing, it's pretty easy to understand. It's a dial.
Sure. You flip it on and you turn it to where you want to listen to something.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't think there's any other like medium of communication that's like it, and I think that's the reason it's still around. It's people say the radio industry is dying, and I don't think it's dying. I think it's just changing. I think it's evolving. But I think the core technology of how FM and AM transmission works, I think there's always going to be a place for that as long as, broadcasting towers still exist.
Well, the fact that you have podcasts that have become so popular tells me that the content that comes over AM is still popular. The media may be changing,
right?
But that content is still deliverable. It's ease of use, it's low cost, and it's accessible to everybody. It makes a lot of sense to keep it around for people who aren't high tech and have disposable income to pay for the content that they're looking for. There's a market for all the other stuff, and there's nothing to take away from that. But AM still serves a huge portion of the public, and I think it's probably worthwhile to keep it around.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, I think we're going to take our first break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about why AM is so important. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we're talking about AM radio and the value of it in today's modern world. So in this segment, we're going to talk about why AM radio is so important. Like I said at the top of the show, I am a producer at an AM radio station, so you can take that however you want. They're not paying me to say this, though. They're barely paying me to work. So some members of the right-leaning media, such as Sean Hannity, suggest the phasing out of AM could be a conspiracy to silence conservative voices. And boy, does that sound like a narrative we've heard before. Many right-leaning talk shows that are the key to the Republican base live on AM. That's very, very true. A lot of the shows that I run are like that. And they are just more popular than a lot of the other shows we get because they have that built-in audience, essentially. Why would we have a note in here about Elon Musk? Isn't Elon Musk emerging as a leader of the right? Why would Tesla be participating in this conspiracy? That's a good point. Elon clearly is on the right side when it comes to the political spectrum. Going back to the EV vehicles wanting to get rid of AM radio, why would he be doing that if it's a constant echo chamber for right-leaning ideas? I don't know. That's a good question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. And it makes me go back to the thought that it's a cost savings thing, but I don't know how you're saving money on it by getting rid of it. What other motivation would he have other than making sure that other medium, he owns Twitter too. So maybe it's a way of trying to make sure that the mediums that he favors more are at the forefront, removing. And I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here, but one of the things that right-leaning side of the country seems to think is that if they eliminate options for people and the only options that you have left to adopt are the options that they want you to adopt, then you obviously wind up following their indoctrination.
Right.
Is this a factor of that? I doubt it. I think that's kind of a stretch, but I think it's more of a technology thing. Like, I don't even know what kind of radio a Tesla has at this point in time because it's a computer interface that it has.
Yeah, I have no idea. But I could see Elon being more of the mind of, there's a ton of right-wing stuff on like YouTube and their own sites that are getting plenty of traffic. And I could see Elon being completely fine with just moving past AM entirely to focus more on that digital side of things. Guys like I'm not even going to mention their names, but you know who they are, the guys that are, on that side of the spectrum that are online doing their shows. They're basically doing an AM talk radio show just on the internet, and they're getting way more eyes on than they would ever get on AM. So I could see Elon just being of the mindset that AM is dead and we'll just move on from it.
Well, and let's be honest, the format that we do on this show here is very well suited, with the exception of the video, obviously, but it's very well suited to being on an AM radio station. Which is why I say, the most popular podcasts that are out there today are really an AM podcast. They're an AM talk show that happens to be on the internet. So there isn't a lack of demand for what AM offers from a format standpoint. Is it just a technology thing?
I mean, yeah. Once again, we go back to this issue of technology. Jordan Walton, executive director of the New Jersey Broadcasters Association, tells us, due to the nature of the sound, AM lends itself to the spoken word, which is why the talk shows gravitate toward it, which is true. When I'm producing shows, we are very aware that we are spoken word when it comes to things like compression rate and what we're uploading our shows at. It really doesn't matter that much because when it's processed through the transmitter, it's going to sound like it sounds on AM no matter what we do to it. Hundreds of foreign language stations on the platform serve marginalized communities, which is also very true. I run a lot of shows dealing with Eastern European communities in the area, Ukrainian people, Polish people. And that was an aspect of the radio industry that I had no idea about before I started this job. And it's really opened my eyes to it, how important it is to these communities to have that access. I mean, holding full-on religious services that through the AM dial